This is Umli, and I've had him for over 25 years, and he does something really cool. Run, Umli, run! Run, Umli, run! Howdy folks, and welcome back to another episode of Tyria Talk. My name is Richard Procopio, aka Otter, and this show is all about Guild Wars 2. Today is episode number 71, and today we're going to be talking about grinding. Real quick, before we get into that topic, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to ArenaNet and GuildWars2Guru.com for this amazing Ritlock shirt. I wrote a haiku and won a contest, so now I have a shirt. So thank you, and go check out GuildWars2Guru.com. They are awesome folks over there. Okay, so let's talk about grinding. Why is this topic coming up? I think I've seen a bunch of threads on the forums and on Reddit kind of come up around the topic of grinding in Guild Wars 2, and I think it stems from the fact that Colin Johansson and Mike O'Brien, when they were doing the announcement for the Heart of Thorns expansion at PAX South, they mentioned grinding as part of their presentation a couple times. It was a little bit like I knew as they were saying it that this was going to be kind of like a hot topic or a buzz, because they mentioned that they're committed to having, you know, no grind in Guild Wars 2, or you know, we don't want to be like other MMOs making you grind unnecessarily. And taking that out of context can spawn all of these debates and conversations about whether or not Guild Wars 2 has grind in it or not. So I wanted to kind of just talk about it and define some things and kind of explore it a bit. And I guess we'll start with what the context was of, you know, what Colin and Mike were trying to say during the Heart of Thorns expansion reveal. They were basically saying they didn't want to have to give anybody unnecessary grind in terms of when you unlock things on your account. With the new mastery system, for example, you will go through these difficult, challenging things in order to unlock new abilities for your characters, to unlock the ability to hang glide, unlock the ability to speak different languages on your races. But once you have that unlocked on your account, it's unlocked for all of your characters. So you don't have to go through this process over and over again if you have 6 or 7 characters. So that's one aspect where they wanted to be grind friendly, for example. The other example was the fact that they're not going to be raising the level cap and have you arbitrarily slog through another 10 levels just to get to a new power plateau, where then you'll then have all of the gear and things that you have acquired become obsolete, and you have to now grind out a new series of gear levels. So it was talking about that they wanted to make the game less grindy in terms of those things, and I think that that's fair and accurate. Now, where I don't think it's fair and accurate, and where a lot of people are kind of you know, pulling these grind quotes out of context, is saying that Guild Wars 2 has no grind in it. That's not a true statement at all. There are lots of things that you can kind of slog towards in Guild Wars 2 and try to earn. But what I think is important, and kind of the point of this topic of this video, is to kind of define what grind is and what is the difference between something that's like an optional grind and a required grind. And these are just my personal opinions. I know other people are going to have, this is going to be a hotly debated topic in the comments, but this is kind of how I see it. So let's talk about what is a grind in an MMO. To me, a grind is something usually repetitive, something usually that turns into something like work that's not necessarily fun to kind of do over and over again. And it's something that, you know, I'll give you some examples in some MMOs, like doing daily quests every single day, the same ones every single day, in order to max out a reputation bar, because you have some there's a faction that you have to get your reputation all the way up for, so that you can have access to a vendor to buy cool stuff for your characters. So that's one thing. You could also have dungeons or raids that you have to kill the same bosses on a daily or weekly basis in order to get the loot drops from them, so that you can increase your character's power level. So that's another one. Or it could be that you have to do a whole bunch of battlegrounds or PvP matches over and over again in order to get your points up to a certain level, so that you can compete in another bracket, or maybe unlock different types of rewards to increase the power level of your characters. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to think about grinding. I think what separates Guild Wars 2 from a lot of other MMOs out there is whether or not the grinding is optional. And I guess you kind of have to define that as well. So in my definition of optional grind is, are the things that you work towards in Guild Wars 2, do you have to do them in order to see everything in the game or experience the content in the game? And I think the answer to that is, for the most part, no. We'll get to a couple of exceptions, and I know before anybody starts commenting in the comments field, but what about this or what about this? I'm going to get to some devil's advocate stuff later. You know, if you're patient with the argument here, but I think for the most part, no. I think for the most part, Guild Wars 2 allows you to see pretty much the entire game, and experience all the different types of content without actually doing any mandatory grinding. For example, you can get to level 80 by just exploring the world, and you know, some people might not enjoy the leveling up process, but I don't think it's necessarily difficult to do or much of a grind to actually level up. Once you get to level 80, it's pretty easy to get a max set of exotic level gear. Now, there's a tier above exotic, and we'll talk about the ascend level in a second, but exotic is typically like the minimum amount of power that you want on your gear in order to kind of do a lot of the content. And I don't think anyone's going to argue that you have to grind out a lot to get exotic gear. That's just really not true. You can get exotic gear either by spending some karma or crafting them yourself, or spending just a couple of gold per item on the trading post, or you can do a combination of those things. And I think it's fairly easy to get a full set of exotic gear for a fresh level 80 character. And with that exotic gear, you can do almost everything in the game. You know, there's a couple exceptions, and we'll talk about that. But I think that for the most part, you can get gear in Guild Wars 2 to do pretty much everything pretty early on. Now, let's talk about some examples from some other games where I'll talk about what I think is a mandatory grind. So, for example, in WildStar, in order to even step into a raid environment in WildStar, to actually do your first 20-person raid, you had to go through an attunement process. And part of that attunement process was doing some challenging things, like you had to get silver medals. I think they've changed that now to bronze medals in the dungeon, so you have to be kind of skillful or adept. But I'm not sure that's necessarily grindy. You just have to perform each dungeon to a certain level, and that will take some practice. But there were certainly steps that I would consider an absolute mandatory grind. You had to do daily quests in order to maximize your reputation, like I kind of did before. And you needed to do that in order to purchase certain things for part of the attunement process. So in order to see some of the major content in the game, there was mandatory grind. There was days or weeks where you had to do a chore over and over again, in this case daily quests, in order to max that out and do it. So they kind of gated some content behind this activity that you kind of were just forced to do. That kind of mandatory grind doesn't exist in Guild Wars 2. And you know, there's other examples. I mean, you can even take in like World of Warcraft, just raiding. Like, for example, they have a raid, you know, a one tier of raiding. Like if you're doing Molten Core raiding, right? You need the gear out of Molten Core, and your whole guild needs to keep getting that gear week after week if they kill the same bosses over and over and over again, even once they become, you know, trivial. You have to do that because when they come out with Black Wings Lair, the next raid, it's going to be harder, and you're going to need the gear from Molten Core to do that. So there's a grind that happens, you know, after you tackle these bosses, figure out the strategies, you have to then farm it for weeks, months, to get your team ready for the next level of gear. So they gate content behind these mandatory grinds, and I don't think that exists in any major capacity in Guild Wars 2. So does that mean that there's no grinding in Guild Wars 2? Absolutely not. There is a lot of grinding in Guild Wars 2. But it's all up to the players to decide what's important for them to get, or what do they feel like they are motivated to actually seek out. There are tons of things you can grind for. Let's start with like the big one. Let's start with legendary weapons in their current form. Even if you're lucky enough to get a precursor drop, which is extremely rare, I've never had one drop for me. Even if you get that exotic weapon to drop for you, and that can start you on your legendary journey, there's so much gold and materials that you need to farm up, and you can literally just in like the tier 6 materials alone, you can grind you can grind killing mobs and doing events until the cows come home, and you're just going to be doing that for hours and hours and hours. Or even if you're just taking an approach of, I'm going to just buy most of it over the trading post, you're going to do dungeon runs over and over and over again, and there's a lot that goes into making a legendary weapon. And but the reality is it looks really super cool, and it has the convenience of that you can switch stats on it, but it's still just as powerful as any other ascended weapon. It does not give you any kind of big advantage. It is not required that you have a legendary weapon in order to see any of the content in Guild Wars 2, and thus it's a completely optional grind for those players who want to actually take that on. So let's speak about the ascended level items in the game, because we talked about the exotic tier, which is pretty easy to get. Is getting ascended gear required of level 80 characters? I would say no. Now, it's debatable how much of an increase of stats you actually get. Somebody's going to say, oh, it gives you a 5% power increase. Some people are going to say it's much more. It's more like 10% increase. Regardless, for, I would say, like 95% of the things that you can do in Guild Wars 2, you don't require extended gear. I play Guild Wars pretty much every single day. I've been playing since launch, and I'll plainly admit, my main character, my warrior, he has a legendary greatsword. He has an ascended underwater spear, and I have ascended rings, amulets, and accessories, but because those are pretty easy to get. But I don't have a full set of ascended armor. I run around in exotics. Why? Because it's not required. I don't feel it's not fun for me to go after that extended armor. I don't have enough finances on my account to do so, and it's just not. It's an optional grind that I don't feel like I'm missing out on any content as a result of it. Am I playing to the absolute maximum efficiency? No, of course not. But again, I think that Guild Wars 2 is structured in a way that it's fine. I can do all the story instances I want. I can play Dragon Ball Arena, in the current festival. I can run dungeons. I can do guild missions with my guild. I can do some world versus world. And you know what? It's not stopping me or hindering me from doing anything. So again, I think ascended level gear is another optional grind that you have there. There's tons of other optional grinds. There's people who want 20,000 achievement points. You can look at the list and kind of grind those things out, like try to get Giant Slayer. You can go for titles. You can go for unlocking all the dies. You can go for unlocking all the mini pets. There's a whole bunch of collections that have been added to the game that you can kind of acquire a whole bunch of different skins for your wardrobe. So I mean, the grind is real in Guild Wars 2. But I just feel that it's structured in a way to not force characters to do any of that, and I think that's a key difference. So let's talk devil advocate a little bit. What are some of the things that people might argue that are non-optional grinds in Guild Wars 2? Well, I hear people talk about fractals a lot. Now, fractals is a set of mini dungeons. If you're newer to the game, it's a set of mini dungeons that will increase in difficulty as you complete these dungeons. So you can do them on level 1 difficulty, and then it goes all the way up to level 50 difficulty, and it gets harder and harder and harder, and you eventually start to have this mechanic called agony, which you would need agony resistance in order to overcome. And so there are very, very expensive infusions that you can do to your gear in order to actually resist that agony. And so you're going to require yourself to get some of the ascended level armors and these really expensive infusions in order to tackle some of the higher tiers of the fractals. So if you are interested in doing level 40 or level 50 fractals and complete those and go after some of those weapon skins that they have in there, then yeah, you're going to need to grind out that gear. Now the question becomes, is this an optional grind? It's content, right? It's like I said before, it is content that's gated behind actually having this type of gear. The difference to me about this is it's not content that I really can't experience otherwise. I've done fractals somewhere up to difficulty level 20, something around there. And yes, I've never done, 25 or 30 or 35, but they're the same instances, just with just more difficult and maybe a few different mechanics here and there. And, after a certain point, they start to have these they have to have they have difficulty levels that have unique challenges associated with them. So, for example, like one of them might be like every time you critical hit, you take some damage back, and so you have to do fractals with that disadvantage on there. So that's kind of what the content difference is. You're like, do the dungeon with a special disadvantage, and to me, that's kind of equivalent to World of Warcraft having a normal mode versus heroic mode, or now they have mythic mode. So it's like I can do the bosses on normal mode, and yeah, I've never actually, you know, seen them on heroic mode, but all it is more difficult and maybe an extra mechanic here or two. I don't feel like it's actually different content enough. You might think that's just playing semantics, but that's how I kind of see it. I don't feel like I need to experience fractal difficulty level 50 in order to know what fractals kind of are about. I feel like I've seen that content, and I don't feel like that's a necessary grind in order to do that. Some people will want to do that just to challenge themselves. They want to tackle that. They want that achievement. They want to be able to say they did it, and that's fine, but I still consider that an optional grind. The other devil advocate argument is there's going to be people who are hardcore into world versus world, and they're going to say we want to be top tier, Blackgate, you know, we want to be #1 on top, you know, depending on your region, and so we want everybody in our war party or our world versus world environment to be, you know, maxed out on every single ascended slot, and we want, you know, maximum everything. You really have to you know, go through those grinds in order to be #1 and all that kind of stuff. Again, yeah, I think you can make the argument to say that that's a mandatory grind if you kind of want to be in that kind of environment. You know, and I know there's some super hardcore world versus world people out there who will also say that it's very, very expensive gold-wise to keep up like all the consumables you have to purchase and the blueprints, and you know, there is an expense to that, and so grinding the gold in order to run really huge world versus world war parties. Yeah, I think there is some validity to that argument. I would counter it a little bit saying, like, I mean, this is you know, for people who are wanting to be the best of the best. You know, I can jump in world versus world on Blackgate during a season, and I can get in and I can run around in my exotics, and I can help my team. You know, and I'm not going to be helping as much as somebody who is max leveled geared, but you know, how much is that? How much is that going to factor in if I jump in there in my exotics and I'm one person out of that? You know, it's weird how it's structured because they can't stop me from doing that. You know, that's part of it being kind of more open worldy. If I wait my time in the queue and get in there, I can join and run around. I can join the public TeamSpeak for Blackgate and run around. So it still feels like, to me, an optional grind. But I'm not a hardcore world versus worlder, and so I'm not going to grind out those pieces and maximize my gear for that purpose. I still have the option to join them once in a while. Just, you know, they'll probably hate me for saying that, but thankfully I don't do that very often. But again, you know, that's another one of those kind of grayish areas. But besides like high-level fractals and besides like true hardcore world versus world, I don't think that there's any kind of mandatory grinds in Guild Wars 2. Now, I want to actually kind of talk about the fact that the optional grind is still not necessarily great, all right? I'm not trying to say, oh, Guild Wars 2 is the best game ever in the entire world because all the grind in it is just completely optional. I don't think that's true at all. I do think that you know, it's easy to paint the picture that, you know, the games that make gear grind mandatory, they're the devil. I mean, you could certainly even try to interpret that what I've been saying here is that, but that's not what I'm doing. There are different solutions to this problem of how do you keep MMO players engaged over long periods of time and not just devour content like instantly. And you know, one of the ways to do that is put these grinds in, whether it's mandatory or not. So I'm not trying to say like every MMO that uses mandatory grinds is bad. It's just a different flavor. Right now, for my lifestyle and how busy things are and stuff like that, it's good to have a game like Guild Wars 2 where that's not required. Like, I will have fun during a festival and do some achievements that I'm interested in, and I know that there's plenty of optional achievements and stuff like that that I could just not worry about. And like I said, I don't have to worry about getting my full ascended gear of armor and different things like that. I go after what's fun to go after, and I leave everything else alone. But there's still something to be said about, is optional grind it's still a solution to this problem, right? They're still trying to keep players interested and busy, giving players a carrot to kind of go after. And is that necessarily the most eloquent solution? And I think the answer to that is probably no. And I'm hoping that in the Heart of Thorns expansion, we're going to see how they innovate on this and kind of move past grinding in the way that it is right now. And I think one of the big examples is the legendary weapon process. They knew right from the start, and they've been talking to us, since like 6 months after launch about redoing the way that you get your precursors in the game, because getting legendary items is just really, there's a lot of low random chance for you to get the item to start the journey, the precursor, and then getting all the materials and stuff is basically a gold grind. It's not particularly interesting or epic feeling. So one of the things they're looking to change in, and we should get some more information about this soon, in Heart of Thorns, is you're going to actually go on this epic scavenger hunt type journey. They're going to use the collection system. It's probably going to be somewhat on par with how you get your luminescent armor right now. Probably a little bit harder than that, but you're going to go around the world. You're going to have this collection open up in your hero panel, and you're going to have to collect all these different objects from around the world in order to build your precursor. And I'm hoping that it's still going to take a long time, and I'm hoping that it's still going to be something that when you finish, you feel accomplished, but it's not just simply make a whole bunch of gold and buy all the materials you need off of the trading post. I hope it's more, special than that. Like, complete this really difficult jumping puzzle in a certain amount of time, right? They can leverage this new adventure mechanic, right? And they could just have a whole bunch of different challenges and things that you have to accomplish, and then if you succeed in all those things, then you're rewarded with your precursor or legendary or something like that. So it still could be considered an optional grind type thing, but it's just different than grinding out gold until your fingers are to the bone and your eyes are bloodshot and other kind of disgusting things happen to your body. So these are all my long-winded thoughts about grind. Well, let me know what you feel in the comments below. Optional grind, good. Optional grind, not good. Mandatory grind, better. Hit me up in the comments field below. And don't forget to hit like, favorite, subscribe to the channel, and all that jazz. And if you have any friends or family that want to buy Guild Wars 2, there's a referral link in the description below. Have them click on that. It will directly support my channel, and I appreciate that very much. I hope everybody has a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Take care.